The basic idea today is going to be going through a couple of the questions that I got from some subscribers in the community Discord. I have them up in the screen right now, where I currently have six, but definitely going to be taking some more questions from people who are watching the stream as well. Um, this is going to be mostly like some game theory stuff and some more overall macro concepts, but definitely going to talk a little bit about the slate this week. This is going to be kind of like my first look at things. I haven't really looked through the results of the models yet, but this will be kind of a first look through things. So pretty excited to go through things. What's up, dude? How you doing? How are you guys doing today? Hope you're doing pretty well on this Friday. I personally am having a kind of lazy day. I tried to code a little bit this morning. I'm trying to learn R so that I can start building some apps because I need to do that for next year. But I'm doing okay. So I hope you guys are doing well today as well. Awesome. You ready to take some notes, ready to get the pen to paper? Cool. All right. Well, you can see here, I don't know if you can actually see here the questions that are up, but the six questions that I pulled from the Discord to start with are going to be what I think the conventional roster build for week 6 is going to be, and any alternatives that offer leverage for that conventional build. When using an optimizer, what percentile should you use? And that one, I think Samson was talking about what percentile in the sheets you should be using. Lineup construction for single entry and 3 max contests. And this one was asked by a subscriber that I think was looking for just specific for NFL, but I'm going to kind of go a little bit more in depth in like game theory and talk a little bit about your goals and kind of who you are as a player and what you should be doing in single entry and 3 max if that's the case. What stats do I weigh most heavily in the sheets? How much leverage is too much leverage? And what should you study about past slates? So going to be going through most of those. I did pull up a couple things to help with this. So I have the sheets that are up for this week as well. And then I also pulled up results database here over at RotoGrinders. And this is something that is a pretty important part of studying past slates. It's something that you should be looking at and trying to learn from the slate from the last week. I usually tell subscribers that most of your research through the week, probably through about Thursday at the very least, probably going through Friday, is going to be reviewing past slates. There's so much more that you can learn from the process of some of the pros. There's so much more that you can learn from the way that people are putting out exposures, that there's just a lot that you can handle in terms of learning from past slates rather than trying to figure out the current slate. Like, it's going to be harder to predict the future than it is to put yourself in a position to win using good process. And you can learn good process from looking at the results database. So, I mean, usually what I'll do, and I'm not going to answer this question straight up yet, but usually what I will do is go into the ownership tab, and I'll show you guys how to get here, and then I'll sort by 150 entries, and I'll try to find, some of the top pros like Max Supa, and I'll be looking through like his ownerships, and I'll look through like how much he had over the field, stuff like that. But we'll get to that question later on. I just wanted to like really hammer home the idea that you should be doing a lot of studying of past slates. So, yeah. You're the only one on your team that didn't take a half day? Lazy day, for sure. Yeah, I mean, if nobody else is there, then you get to work as hard as you want to work. You work 2 jobs, so you're currently watching while working the first job. That sucks, and I'm sorry. I worked 2-3 jobs for a long time, and it's pretty brutal, especially as you get older. Like, you get pretty fucking tired. Madison chalk this week. It should be. I mean, it really, really should be. Like, when you look at the sheets and when you think through, like, who he is and what he's walking into, like, 7,200 is probably a little bit too cheap for what he's supposed to be doing. You need to read that information Strictly Business has kindly provided. You guys are awesome. Yeah. So Strictly, like, he put together, if you guys don't know who Strictly Business is, he's one of the really awesome subs over at the Paydirt community. He does a lot of community posts on the site. So his most recent one goes into how to study past slates. And it's right here. This is a free post. So if you guys aren't subscribers to the site, you can still see it. But here he broke down pro player Ricky D. He broke down his play and his exposures from week 2 up through week 5. He talked a lot about what Ricky D does and how his approach is. So if you guys haven't seen that yet, go to the site and go check that out. But yeah, Strictly Business put together a really good piece that talks about some past slate tendencies of pros. Did you post it in the Discord and you find it? It's not in the Discord. You can just go to the site, like it's the second community post, I think. Yeah, so my most recent one is the opportunity search tool, and then Strictly Business's post is right here. So, all right, let's get into things a little bit. So first things first, Pablo asked what I think the conventional build is going to be for this week and kind of how to leverage that build. So when I want to know what a conventional build is going to look like, you kind of sort by percent owned, like you sort by the largest ownership percentages in the sheets on the overall ranges tab. And then you can kind of get a look. And actually, I wonder if my, hold on. Wonder if I have an update to ownership really quick, because that would be nice. Not anything there. What about here? No, I do not have an update. Well, that's a bummer, but that's okay. Whatever. So what you're going to do is you are going to sort by projected DK ownership. If you're on DraftKings, obviously, if you're on FanDuel, then it's going to be FanDuel ownership. And then you're going to kind of take a look and see who is projected to be the highest owned, right? So there's 3 players that project for over 20% ownership. Alexander Madison, Derrick Henry, and A.J. Brown. So the first thing that you're going to do then is you're going to go over into the stacks, and you're going to kind of plug those guys in. So you'll start with Alexander Madison. And then you'll go with A.J. Brown, right? And then who's the third one? I don't remember. Derrick Henry. All right. So here's the thing. I do not think that people are going to be playing Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown together. Maybe they will, but I think more people than not are going to be trying to avoid this combination. Most people understand that you have negative correlation between running backs and wide receivers. It's something that kind of lowers your ceiling. I mean, maybe AJ Brown is so cheap that people are going to be playing both Derrick Henry and AJ Brown and just say, oh, AJ Brown can get there on receiving yards, and Derrick Henry is going to be able to get there on, touchdowns. Maybe that's the way that it's going to work. Yeah, I'm at work, can't listen, but I'll watch the bottom when I get home. Hell yeah, dude. Cool. I'll have it posted to the site and to YouTube, of course, later on, like after I'm done. Do I prefer the Giants D or the Washington D? I'm actually going to be doing slate-specific, the recipe for success tomorrow, as usual. This one's just going to be kind of like a Q&A about NFL DFS in general, or about season long. Like, I know that you personally, Ganja Gamers channel, does do season long a lot. So if you have questions about season long and stuff like that, like, we can talk about that kind of stuff. But I want to kind of like keep this one as a Q&A for strategy and game theory and stuff like that instead. So after you have these 3, you kind of have to make the decision about whether you think that Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown are going to be played together. When you look at the overall projected ownership, it kind of feels like what most people are going to be doing is paying up at running back, whereas you can have this combination of Alexander Madison and Derrick Henry, who both cost over $7K. And then you have mid-range wide receivers that are looking at, like they're garnering ownership. You have like Kenny Galladay, who's 6K. You have AJ Brown, 5,600. Terry McLaurin, 5,700. And then you have this like kind of last running back that is a little bit cheaper, right? 5,800 for David Montgomery or 5,400 for David Johnson. But it kind of looks like most of the running back plays are going to be more expensive in terms of where people want to go. So I think that you can probably just say, you can remove AJ Brown from this and you can go down here and say, maybe this is David Montgomery. And then is there a defense that looks like where's the defensive ownership sitting? So defensive ownership is sitting pretty expensive as well. Looking like Patriots sitting way up over Denver, if that game plays, obviously. And then Colts sitting way up over Cincinnati, 12% owned. Dolphins at 29% owned, or I mean at 9% owned, not 29, 2,900, 9% owned. So, I mean, people are probably going to try to say something like, I don't know, let's just say the Colts defense, right? Oops. All right, so we're left with 5,100. Where is the stack that looks like it's going to be highest owned? And like, I'm going through this process right now because I'm trying to answer the question of like, what do I think the conventional build strategy is going to be? And I want to show how I'm getting to that instead of just saying, oh, well, I think people are going to pay up for running backs and then pay down a wide receiver. Like, I want to show how I get there. In terms of QB ownership. So now that we know that people are probably going to be paying up for running back and they're probably going to be like somewhere in the mid-range for wide receivers, then we want to see who the highest projected owned quarterbacks are going to be. It's looking like Matt Ryan is asking for some chalk. I know there's a lot of Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford chalk, or at least talk, not chalk. Gardner Minshew. I know that Jacksonville. So it seems like people are liking that Detroit-Jacksonville game. So we'll run back over here into the stacks. And most people are saying that Jacksonville is really bad, and most people are saying that Detroit is really bad. So I think that that probably speaks to, I mean, either one of them, right? It doesn't really matter which one you use. They're both about the same price. 6,400 for Gardner Minshew, 6,300 for Matthew Stafford. So, okay. People are probably going to be paying in the mid-range. We'll just say Matthew Stafford for now. And either way, if you are going to be using Matthew Stafford or you're going to be using Gardner Minshew, 6,400, or you're going to be using, I know that there's been some talk about Kirk Cousins or Matt Ryan, like where are those wide receivers mostly sitting in terms of price? If people are going to be using Matthew Stafford, they're probably going to have Kenny Galladay. If people are going to be using Thielen, then, or if they're going to use Cousins, they have to use Thielen, but that price difference with Cousins being less expensive, this isn't really a huge jump up. If people are going to be using Gardner Minshew, then I know there's like some love for Laviska Shenault, or like Keelan Cole for sure as well, 4,900. So those guys are a little bit cheaper. But it definitely kind of seems like what this week is shaping up to be with having 4,800 left here. You're going to have to pay down at wide receiver somewhere and then pay either down at wide receiver or down at tight end. But it's definitely looking like people are going to be paying up for running back. People are going to be mid-range for quarterback, and there's going to have to be a punt somewhere for tight end or wide receiver. Maybe people are dropping off of David Montgomery. I don't know that yet, but it's kind of looking like this wide receiver is going to be mid-range, which makes sense considering the ownerships that we're seeing. I really don't think that we're going to have a lot of ownership on Devontae Adams. I don't think we're going to have a lot of ownership on Calvin Ridley. There will be like no ownership on these guys who are like relatively high owned, because if people are going to be liking Matthew Stafford, people are going to be liking Gardner Minshew, people are going to be liking Matt Ryan, it's going to be hard to afford the more expensive wide receiver one-offs. They're going to be living in this mid-range, getting Kenny Galladay, getting AJ Brown, getting DJ Chark if he's in. Like, it just makes more sense. So That is how I would break down where I think most people are going to be spending their money. My assumption is the move would be to pay up for wide receiver to differentiate in the grand scheme of things. I mean, I'll see how I kind of like want to talk through that here in a sec after I get caught up in the comments. I'm here watching and going with flow, not sure the question I can ask of. It's all good, man. We'll get to the questions a little bit later on. Stafford Alliance, Matt Ryan chalk. Yeah, Matt Ryan chalk is weird. I don't think that that's going to come to fruition. Like from what I am hearing around the industry and from what I've heard people talk about, kind of seems like people are liking Matthew Stafford, people are liking Ryan Fitzpatrick, people are liking Gardner Minshew, and people are really liking like Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady and that kind of comeback stack. I'm hearing nothing about Lamar Jackson. I never hear anything about Lamar Jackson, and he's always under 10% owned, which is hilarious. But yeah, people are mostly focusing on that Detroit, Jacksonville, and the Minnesota and Houston game. Like there's some Deshaun Watson talk as well. So let's see. What are some QB, TE, wide receiver stacks you like best? Are you going off, or am I going back to, I can't remember his name, Olamide, if Julio's out? Good call on Fulgham. Thanks. You didn't have Claypool, though. Nobody had Claypool. Don't feel bad about that. So, all right. Now that we know where people are kind of going, we know that people are paying up at running back and people are paying down or in the mid-range for wide receiver. People are paying 6K and up at quarterback. So we know that the way that you're going to be able to pivot is if you're either paying down at running back or if you're paying way up at wide receiver or way down at wide receiver. Really, I think that you kind of have to get pigeonholed into a lot of the typical build strategy for this week. It's kind of hard when you go and you look at the running back ranges. Like the running backs that project really, really well are going to be more expensive. There's a couple guys like Ezekiel Elliott's not on the slate, Devin Singletary's not on the slate, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is not on the slate. Like once you remove those, right, then the ones that project really, really well are going to be expensive. 7K, 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 7K outside of Myles Gaskin. So it's kind of hard to pay down at running back this week when you have all of these guys who are projected really, really well. So I don't think that you can really pay down at running back unless something drastic happens. There might be a case where you can get away with somebody like Devontae Freeman, who has seen more opportunity. You might be able to get away with Adrian Peterson, who is in a decent spot against Jacksonville. But for the most part, like you're paying up. It's really, really hard to pay up or to pay down at running back outside of Myles Gaskin, who's a good play, and I'm sure he's actually going to garner quite a bit of ownership. If he doesn't, Myles Gaskin is going to be a really, really good pivot away from somebody like David Montgomery or something like that. So I think you kind of have to pay up at running back this week. So that just means that the only way to get away from the chalk that is going to be played is either pay up at quarterback or be on stacks that are not going to be popular, right? So it's kind of hard. I think that you're going to be building in a way that is pretty similar to a lot of people this week. I think that there's very good chalk around the 7K range. I think Alexander Madison's fantastic chalk. I think Derrick Henry is okay chalk. I don't think that he's great, but I think he's okay. The main piece you're going to be getting away from is David Montgomery. But to answer your question, Pablo, I think that it's probably going to be a pay up at running back week because you really can't pay down at running back. There's no good spots to pay down. The best way to get away from that is going to be paying up at quarterback and punting somewhere at wide receiver, or paying way down at defense, way down at tight end, and paying way up at wide receiver. That's probably the best way that you can get away from it. What are some QB wide receiver tight end stacks that you like best? If you have a subscription to the site, like you can see that I'm probably going to be like living in these areas. Like I mostly just follow this when I want to. I also go into the Vegas tab and I look at the teams that are projected for the most points. Like Minnesota's in a good spot, Detroit's in a good spot, Miami's in a good spot. Green Bay, Tennessee. I don't think that people are going to be using Ryan Tannehill. So that's a pretty interesting spot. And you can do Ryan Tannehill, AJ Brown, and Jonnu Smith really, really easily. The other spot that I think is probably going to be pretty interesting is Baltimore for sure. I'm on Baltimore every single week though, so that's not anything crazy. And then I think Tampa Bay is going to go under the radar a bit because they are in a spot where they are relatively expensive. If you go with, say, Tom Brady, I think it's Godwin, and then Mike Evans, you end up having like very, very little money if you end up going with the chalk pairing here. I probably don't want to go with the chalk pairing, but like if you go with this, then you're going to be very, very different because people aren't going to play Tom Brady, Chris Evans, and Mike Godwin's, or Chris Godwin and Mike Evans together. So I really do like that Tampa Bay stack if I can fit it. It's just going to be really hard. Can't play Montgomery and Gaskin. I don't like Montgomery, dude. Montgomery doesn't project well, and really like if you go over and use the tool that I built recently and you put in David Montgomery, like I don't want to play this, you know? I don't want to play somebody who it just has not actually had all that good of metrics. He's not really that good in terms of points per touch. He doesn't get that many opportunities. He doesn't get that many rushing attempts. Like he's basically a way worse Alvin Kamara. So I don't want to play Montgomery. But that being said, like you probably could play Montgomery and Gaskin and get away from the top end running backs of Derrick Henry and like Mike Davis and Alexander Madison. You could pay down like that, and you would still be in a spot where you end up eating quite a bit of chalk. Like if you go David Montgomery here, and if you go with Myles Gaskin, like you leave yourself a pretty good amount of money. You leave yourself $5K per player if you go with that route. So like I said, I think Myles Gaskin is going to end up being more popular than he is. If he's not, then that's awesome. Just lock him in MME and run on. But this is probably a pretty decent pairing. That's a pretty good point to bring up if you are okay with David Montgomery. I personally am not. I'd much rather fade him. I think that I am probably going to do something with 2 running backs and wide receiver in the flex. But that's not a bad idea if you're okay with eating David Montgomery chalk. Myles Gaskin is the pivot off of Montgomery chalk. If he stays low owned, yeah. I love Myles Gaskin this week. AP is Q, which might open the Swift door. Yeah, I just fucking hate the Lions. When you look at the opportunities, there's a certain number that you want to focus on more. On the opportunity search tool, I'm looking quite a bit at points per touch. I'm also looking at overall workload. So something for this where we can look at the 3 cheaper running backs, right? Go Myles Gaskin, go David Johnson, and we can go David Montgomery. Like, between these 3 players, the one that I probably want to play is going to be Myles Gaskin. I know that Myles Gaskin is getting more work lately. I know that he's getting consistent work in the passing game. He's started getting some red zone targets. He has quite a bit of the red zone rushing market share, which is really important. And his points per touch is good. It averages somewhere around like 0.85, which is pretty good. Like if you get 20 touches and you're at 0.85 points per touch, like that's going to be a pretty decent outing with upside. David Johnson over here, he is averaging significantly less than 1 fantasy point per touch, but he's getting more rushing work. He's getting more of the red zone rushes. He's getting more of the red zone work. The receiving market share is not much better, but he's starting to get more red zone work, and that's going to lead to better. If you think that he is going to continue to get these more rushing work and see it continue to go up, then I think that we'll see the fantasy points continue to go up. David Montgomery just had a really good receiving game, and this is actually 6. I don't know why it's coming back to 3. But just had a good day in terms of targets. But if you look at that, like that's an aberration as of everything else that he does, right? He had some red zone work, but he didn't get any in week 5. He doesn't really get any of the red zone rushing market share, and Chicago likes to run the ball or pass the ball in the red zone anyway. He doesn't get red zone carries. He doesn't get carries, period. Like 14-10-10 is not inspiring confidence. His fantasy points per touch when he ends up getting the targets is good, but then outside of that, like he's sitting down here in like the 0.7 range. So he doesn't really get the opportunity. I'd much rather play probably either one of these players over David Montgomery. When you look at these graphs and when you look at the way these running backs are headed, it's pretty obvious that David Montgomery is kind of the one that looks like he's getting the least push up. So, wanted to answer that really quick. What's the next one? When using an optimizer, what percentile do I use? So to answer that question, we'll go back into the overall ranges. There's a couple different ways that people are going to be looking at this. There's no one correct answer to this. I think there's a lot of different ways to use the numbers at your disposal. But there will be some people that want to just use medians. When you're using median projections, that's mostly what you want to be using for cash games. The idea behind cash games is that you are playing players that have the best median expectation. All you want to do in cash games, though, is beat 55% of the field or beat 60% of the field. Like, you don't want to have a huge score in cash games. You literally just want to have enough of a score to beat half of the field. And that's where medians come in. That's where value comes in. If somebody is a good median projection, then that means they're going to hit a good 50th percentile projection a significant amount of the time. And that's something that comes well in cash games. It doesn't work in GPPs. There's a very different way to build in GPPs. Personally, if I was going to be MMEing, I would only want to be looking at 4x percentage. I would probably convert this to like an actual number, maybe multiply it by 10 or something like that. But I would be using the 4x percentage in the sheets, just because that's the thing that's going to be giving you the highest upside. Players like Stephon Diggs or Gabriel Davis, Stephon Diggs, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Myles Gaskin, Devin Singletary has a higher ceiling than somebody like David Montgomery. Like, things like that matter. You want to be sorting by 4x so that you can be getting more of a ceiling. Like, you need to be getting into that like 80th percentile range of a player's outcomes in order to actually take down a GPP. You don't really care about 4x percentage in terms of cash games because you don't need to be scoring in the top 20th percentile in cash games. You shouldn't be scoring in the top 20th percentile in cash games. You literally just want to be like right above the cash line. But in GPPs, you want to be getting way, 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 way up there. You want to be ramping up the variance. You want to be taking players that are boom or bust, taking players that can end up giving you a large fantasy score relative to their price, rather than just like 3x. You don't want to be dealing with players who can score anything less than 20 plus, which is another thing. You could be sorting by 20 plus percentage. If you like, it's my belief that you really can't take down GPPs unless you're using players that can score at least 20 fantasy points. You guys hear me talk about that quite a bit in the Discord. But for the most part, I want to be sorting by 20 plus percentage so that I can see what players actually give me a chance to meet that threshold. A lot of these players are going to be priced up, right? Like DeAndre Hopkins is a wide receiver. He's very, very expensive because he has a good chance of hitting 20 plus fantasy points. Devontae Adams, very expensive, good chance of hitting 20 plus fantasy points. Mike Davis, pretty expensive, good chance of hitting 20 plus fantasy points. Where you start to find the value is when you have players that are not quarterbacks that meet this threshold. Somebody like Myles Gaskin, who's only 5,400, he has a pretty good chance. Somebody like Devin Singletary, 5,700, he has a pretty good chance. So be looking at that kind of stuff. If I was going to be MMEing, I'd probably want to enter this into the MME, into the optimizer, so that I can try to optimize the best chance to have 20 plus fantasy points. Let's see, let's get caught up a little bit here. What do you think of CEH going forward from Bell with here? Okay, so Bell is going to take that job, I think, like by week 8 at the latest. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a rookie. Like most teams don't want a rookie to be the main back for them, unless it's somebody like Christian McCaffrey or if it's somebody like Saquon Barkley or something like that that was drafted specifically for the role. The Chiefs don't really do that. The Chiefs like using multiple running backs, and they like having veteran presences. I think that Lev Bell fits that system really, really well. They like using their running backs in the passing game. I think he excels in that. He's going to, at the very least, end up having the third down role. But I think he takes the full role away from Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and I don't think that they want to burn him out in his rookie year. It just doesn't make any sense. They would have preferred to have Damian Williams and him sharing the role anyway. So I think Lev Bell takes over the majority work. I could be wrong about that, and I'm okay with being wrong about it, but I think he takes over the majority of the work. You're leaning Singletary over Montgomery. I am as well. I think that's a good spot to be. But he is Monday Night Football, so you'd have to play over the entire slate. Can you ask a question about last week? You liked Mahomes, Kelsey, Watkins, Crowder, Hopkins, Jacobs, Waller. I can't make things fit, and I get stuck at 12:35 Eastern time. I don't know what to do. I'm rattled by then. So you should be kind of playing around a little bit. Like you should be going into in the range of outcomes, you should be going into the stacks, and you should kind of be doing what I did right here, and you should be seeing what you can fit. Like if you like, for instance, this week, let's just call it a Green Bay stack. Start with Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, and Robert Tonyan. And then you know that you have about 4,900 left. So usually what I do is I kind of go in and I'll pick my defense next. And I usually have a cheap defense that I like. This week I don't know where I'm going to go yet, but you probably take the Lions or something like that for only 3K. And then you know that you have 5,200 left. But you should be going into here and you should be like last week, if you liked that stack, Mahomes, Kelsey, and Watkins. You should be putting that in here and you should be toying around with things. Not necessarily building a lineup to enter, but kind of toying around. Like if you know that you really like Alexander Madison this week. Oops. And you know that you really, really like Myles Gaskin. Like just start there and then kind of build around them. Like can you fit a full Baltimore stack around them? With Marquise Brown. And then, who are they facing again? Philadelphia? I don't know. Zach Ertz, whatever. Like, can you fit this? You have 4,500 left? Yeah, you can probably fit that. Can you do it if you go with Derrick Henry? Getting a little bit tight. 4K left. Defense is going to drop you down to about 4,500 left, but getting pretty tight. So go in there and just kind of play around. Like play around and see what you can actually fit on the slate. And then that way, once you have an idea of what you can fit and where you can go, like when you get to 12:35 Eastern time, like you kind of know what your bounds are. You know what your strengths are, and you know where you can actually fit things and who you actually can fit into your lineups. How do you get to the 80th percentile? I don't have that on here, but like that is something where you just kind of have to understand what the players are. Like, for instance, Will Fuller last year when he was playing with DeAndre Hopkins, his 80th percentile outcomes were really, really high because he had a super high ADOT. He was getting really, really deep targets. Kind of the same thing as Deshaun Jackson. Like Deshaun Jackson is going to get really, really deep targets week in, week out. And that kind of stuff is going to lead to big scores, but not very often. His median outcome is going to be like 7 fantasy points, but his 80th percentile outcome is going to be something like 30 fantasy points. So you can go back and you can kind of look through the game logs and find out what they are most likely to be. And yeah, Strictly Business has a sheet that is pinned to the Discord that shows 80th percentile outcomes based on range of outcomes. So you can take a look at that as well. What do you think of Irv Smith? Seems like targets are trending up. Let's go find out. Let's go find out. Irv Smith Jr., I think. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, targets seem like they're trending up a little bit. He ended up getting 4 targets last week. His yards per target is actually pretty good. He ends up at around 2 fantasy points per touch, which is all right. He did get some red zone targets these last 2 weeks, but I don't know. 4 targets is not super inspiring. The deep targets is nice for his price. It's probably okay, but at 2 fantasy points per touch, if he's going to get 4 targets, then you think that he's going to end up getting, 3 catches, and at that point, his median outcome is like 7 fantasy points or something. If he scores a touchdown, he scores 13. It's okay. It's probably a little bit thin. I think people are going to be using him a little bit more than they probably should this week, though. But you can go and check that stuff in the opportunity tool, which is posted on the site. Am I doing any Dalton stacks going forward, and what wide receivers do I think are best for rest of season? Any interest in Perrine, hoping that Gase gets fired and Gore is done to give him the job? I don't know what to think about the Dallas situation yet. Andy Dalton is fine. Like, he's not a bad quarterback by any means. And behind that offensive line, he's probably going to be okay. He won't be Dak. It probably just kind of helps Amari Cooper hold down the job. I think that Andy Dalton is used to having one alpha wide receiver. There's going to be one wide receiver that emerges from Dallas that I think is going to be good. I don't think that they're going to be in a position where they are spreading out the ball as much as they did before because Andy Dalton is not as good at going through his reads as Dak Prescott was. I also think they're probably going to end up running the ball a bit more and limiting what Andy Dalton has to do, which is probably going to make them a less explosive offense and focusing on one wide receiver. I think you kind of need to look at what happens this week and who he tees in on because that's who he's going to be going to. Like, that's who his safety link is going to be. And in terms of Prime, like, no, I don't know. I think that rookie running backs suck, like always. And I've said that in the offseason as well, that you can't really bank on any running backs that are rookies having a huge impact in the game. It's a really, really rare thing. So I don't know. Gase might get fired and they might get rid of Gore, but I'm not trying to predict the future. I think that's something that people are going to try to do, and most of the time they're going to be wrong. I'd rather go 20 point over 4x over 80th percentile for MME. I like 20 plus percentage. I think that it works well for what MME needs to be. 80th percentile is just something that you have to keep in mind. Like, it's important to understand who has high ceilings. It's important to understand who is going to be able to actually give you large fantasy points. It's just an important thing. You think Engram breaks out soon? The Clapper doesn't seem to know how to use him with that low ADOT. Well, if he doesn't know how to use him with Ingram, then I don't think that he's going to break out soon. Do you know a good site that rates CB performance? Defense does not matter. Don't worry so much about cornerbacks. Cornerbacks matter a significant amount less than defensive ends, which matter a significant amount less than what the offense is actually going to allow them to do. So the only reason why quarterbacks ever have good performances is either a Marcus Peters or Darius Slay situation where they're very aggressive and they end up trying to go for interceptions, which actually leads to big plays happening more often, or they are a product of a very good defensive line. Think somebody like the Chargers. The Chargers have Joey Bosa to wreak havoc in the back line, so they are able to take advantage of that, where it's going to give the quarterback less time to throw. He's going to be under pressure. He's going to make bad throws, so it makes cornerbacks look better. What about defensive line stats? You can go to PFF. PFF has a good offensive line versus defensive line metric that they use. You can also find that on linemovement.com, where there is a NFL metrics tool that shows the offensive line matchups for each week. All right. Lineup construction for single entry and 3-max. So this is kind of something that is a little bit more nuanced and has a lot more to do with who you are as a player. So in single entry and 3-max, that is going to be, for most people, I think something where they are significantly more risk averse. They are going to be entering their cash game lineups. They're going to be entering things that they think are more safe because they only have one lineup. They only have 3 lineups. So you're going to see a lot of the top pros play their more safe lineups there, whereas in their MME, they are going to be playing more risky lineups. They're going to be having more risky exposures. So when you're playing something like single entry or 3-max, a lot of people are going to be playing their safer lineups. Now, that means 2 things, right? It means that you, if you are risk averse, are probably going to be following that example, where you're going to be putting in your more safe lineups, right? Where you're going to be putting in something that is like your cash lineup, or you're just going to be putting your cash lineup into it. But when you think about that, you think about the fact that most of the field is probably going to be doing the same thing. It's going to raise ownership on the quote-unquote safe plays, the Alexander Madisons, the Derrick Henrys. It's probably going to raise their ownership in single entry and 3-max. If you're like me, that's an opportunity to take advantage of the field trying to be safer and pivot away from those plays. So there's 2 different routes here. If you are a more safe player, if you are more risk averse, then what you're going to be doing in single entry and three max is likely going to be playing safer lineups so that you can give yourself a better chance to stay with a field if the chalk does well. If you're like me and you accept risk and you want to ramp up variance, then you're going to be pivoting away or leveraging the chalk more heavily in those lineups. But it all kind of goes back to who you are as a player. I think that if you are a more risk averse player and you're playing single entry or three max, you still need to be able to pivot. You still need to be able to leverage the field. But maybe you're going to be eating more chalk. Maybe you are going to be saying, okay, well, in single entry and three max, if this is a 5,000 person tournament, you know that you still need to have leverage somewhere. You know that you can't just play Alexander Madison, Derrick Henry, and a Jags Detroit stack with a chalk defense. You need to be pivoting somewhere. Maybe you identify that Alexander Madison is going to be way higher owned than Adam Thielen. So you end up playing a Minnesota Vikings stack and fading Alexander Madison in single entry, but then playing all the chalk with the rest of your lineup. You fit in Derrick Henry, you fit in David Montgomery, you fit in Kenny Golladay and AJ Brown. Like you put all of that together so that you have a lot of chalk around your one pivot away from another piece of chalk. When you're playing single entry or three max, you're mostly going to be putting together lineups for most people that are going to be safer and are going to be pivoting in one or two spots. For me personally, when I'm building out a single entry or three max, I want to be identifying where the chalk is going to be sitting and thinking about the best way to leverage that, especially because I know that the chalk is going to be so much heavier in single entry and three max. If you go to the range of outcomes and you sort by ownership, once again, when I look at this, like these are not solidified by any means. They'll get better as the week goes on. But I know that Alexander Madison, Derrick Henry, and AJ Brown are going to be chalk. Which one of those pieces do I think is going to fail the most? Well, it's probably AJ Brown. His LevX is the worst on the slate. People are way overvaluing him as a play, 21% owned at 5,600. He only projects for 13 fantasy points. So in that case, in single entry, like if I think that AJ Brown is going to be chalk, how is the way that he is not going to get there? Well, it's probably going to be because Derrick Henry ended up crushing. I'm okay eating the Derrick Henry chalk in this instance because AJ Brown is also going to be heavy chalk. So I'm probably going to build around Derrick Henry in single entry if these ownerships hold up. I can also look at the rest of this and say, okay, well, where are the main quarterback chalks going to be? I know that I'm already going to use Derrick Henry, so I'm not going to use Ryan Tannehill. But Matt Ryan is going to be chalk? Okay, well, that means that I maybe want to go with Todd Gurley to complement my Derrick Henry chalk. I know that I'm already avoiding AJ Brown, so I'm avoiding what is 20% of the chalk. I can start kind of finding my pivots away from that. Look at Todd Gurley. He's only projected for 4% ownership, but Matt Ryan is projected for 12% ownership. Calvin Ridley is going to be projected for higher ownership. Stuff like that, where I can pivot away from one of the main game stacks, or I can pivot away from one of the main running backs. That's going to be your main points of leverage in single entry and three max. And this is all hand building stuff. Like if you're MMEing, there's a different way to think about it. Like you would be putting in groups of saying, if a lineup has Derrick Henry, it does not have AJ Brown. Or if a lineup has Todd Gurley, it does not have Matt Ryan. Or if a lineup has Kenny Golladay, then it does not have Matt Stafford. If you're ending up saying, okay, well, the Lions are going to have to pass from behind, that means that Matthew Stafford maybe isn't going to get there. But those are the kind of things that you're thinking about. In single entry and three max, you're mostly wanting to just pivot in one or two spots, unless you are very accepting of risk like me, where I'm going to be trying to take advantage of as much of the chalk as I possibly can, because I know that it's going to be very condensed. I mostly want to try to find one spot where I think the field is way overvaluing somebody and think about the best way to leverage that one spot. That one spot right now looks like AJ Brown, which means that I would want a lot of the Tennessee running game and maybe also the Tennessee defense, because if I think that they are controlling the game on the ground quite a bit, then I think that the opposing team is likely going to have to try to pass from behind, and that's going to cause some mistakes. It's like standard deviation plus mean. If it's higher than 20 to 25, they are playable. If not, then bye, Felicia. That's your own personal strategy. Anyone else can fall in my lineup and create crap. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that that's right. I think that you have to make sure that if you don't have the opportunity of scoring more than 20 fantasy points, you really shouldn't play those players. And that's a really easy way to just cut down on your player pool. Like, if somebody can't score 20 plus fantasy points in a reasonable expectation, then why are you playing that player? It's kind of like people want to talk themselves into like bad running backs or bad wide receivers. Like, it's just if you're paying over 5K for somebody and they can't get you 20 fantasy points, then you're wasting a pick on that play. And that's kind of a situation where I try not to predict the future of individual outcomes too much. I think that roster construction is a lot more important. But that is something that I buy into of if a player can't score me 20 plus fantasy points in a regular outing, in like within one standard deviation outing, I don't want to roster them. Am I playing the spy? I'm probably going to play power sweep this week and do 3 entry max in the power sweep. Let's see, what stats do I weigh most heavily in the sheets? So I can go answer that pretty easily. I've already talked a lot about the things that I look at. I'm looking at quite a bit. I want to pay attention to 20 plus percentage. This is something that I sort by every single week. I sort by negative LevX. So this is plays that I definitely do not want a part of. AJ Brown, Terry McLaurin, David Johnson, David Montgomery, and Mike Evans. Those are the top 5. But for the most part, like if there's one glaring spot that like just looks terrible, AJ Brown this week is a good example. Like I absolutely do not want AJ Brown. He looks like the worst play on the slate by a long shot. And then you have Terry McLaurin, David Johnson, and David Montgomery, who are also 10% overvalued by the field. I probably don't want any part of those guys either. But I will sort by a negative LevX so that I can see who I want to avoid, because personally, for me, who I avoid is going to be more important to me than who I play. Because like I'll put together stacks and I'll build my correlations of different stacks where I'm just playing the players that fit the best for those stacks and fit the best for my secondary correlations. And so long as I'm avoiding players that I do not want to have, I think that I'm still giving myself a chance to end up with a good lineup. See, have a weird feeling Hines goes randomly off, but no balls to play. Gotta have balls, dude. Don't be a pussy. What percentage is a reasonable expectation for 20 plus percentage? That's kind of nuanced. Let's see. I mean, if somebody can't find you 20 plus fantasy points like at least 50% of the time, you probably don't want to play them, right? Like as soon as you get into this range where you have these guys like, especially below 40%, when you start getting down here, these are guys that you really like probably don't want to play. Their median expectations, like if Raheem Mostert has a median projection of 16 fantasy points, but only hits 20 plus fantasy points 38% of the time, like that sucks, dude. You don't want to play that. That is certainly not something that I want to be buying into very often. It's just not a situation where they're going to be giving you good fantasy points very often at all. You'd be much better off playing Devin Singletary for Monday Night Football. You'd be much better off playing Myles Gaskin, who ends up getting there at 5,400. Much better off playing, I don't know, like Stephon Diggs. Like you're going to be needing to pay up quite a bit for most of the time, unless there's good value. But yeah, once you get below 50%, like you start kind of getting into these ranges where it's not great. And then once you get below 40%, it's like, you're really starting to fuck yourself over. Unless it's somebody who's really cheap. Gabriel Davis this week makes sense. Deontay Johnson, especially off of a couple injuries, makes sense. Like it's more nuanced than that. But most of the time, like when I talk about this kind of stuff, yes, the numbers matter. Yes, you need to be paying attention to this stuff. But most of the time, I think that if you're looking at individual players, you're not really doing it right. You want to be looking at stacks that make sense. You want to be looking at combinations of players that make sense. You don't want to be looking at an individual player and saying, oh, well, I absolutely need to play Devontae Parker because he has a 55% chance to be 20 plus fantasy points. Does Devontae Parker make sense in the lineup? Like you're not ever really choosing an individual player. You're building a lineup. So if you're playing Devontae Parker, it's probably because you either have a Miami main stack or you have a Miami secondary stack, right? So if you have Devontae Parker, who rates as a pretty decent, like 20 plus percentage, you're going to be bringing it back with Jameson Crowder. You're not just playing Devontae Parker. You're also playing Jameson Crowder. And if you have these two, you're either going with Ryan Tannehill, or not Ryan Tannehill, Ryan Fitzpatrick. Or you're going with Joe Flacco. So like you're making decisions about multiple players at once. You're not ever just looking at one player and saying, "Oh, I want to play them because they have this good metric." Like you're looking at them as a combination. You're never just playing one player, and that's something that a lot of people mess up on. Is you're looking at projections, or you're looking at 20 plus percentage, or you're looking at 4x percentage, or you're looking at LevX. Like there's never one thing that's saying you should or should not play this player. It goes together with, is Devontae Parker in a good spot? Does that mean that I can bring it back with Jameson Crowder? Do I want to play Ryan Fitzpatrick with him? Same thing with like Stephon Diggs. Like Stephon Diggs is a good play on his own, but it doesn't matter if you're not bringing back with somebody else. It doesn't matter if you're not pairing him with Josh Allen. Is Josh Allen cheap enough to justify Stephon Diggs? Like you're not just looking at one player or one individual metric. You're building lineups. You're not trying to choose one player to do well. You're building lineups. So 20 plus threshold is hard for wide receivers because you'll end up with a pool of 3 wide receivers. Yeah, it's so much more nuanced. Like you really should not be choosing individual players based on metrics. Like especially wide receivers. Do I have this wide receiver in my stack? Do I have them in my secondary correlation? If not, like, are they a screaming value? That's pretty much it. Those are the 3 things you're looking for wide receivers. Either a correlation in your main stack, correlation in your secondary stack. Are they a screaming value? Like Olamide last week, he was a fine one-off because he was 3 fucking K. But like, you should use him in correlation with Robbie Anderson. This week, like, Gabriel Davis is a good play for Monday Night Football, but you're not playing him unless you're playing him with Watkins or with Travis Kelce or with Tyreek Hill. Like you should be correlating your wide receivers. That's the thing that matters way more than any stat, any projection, anything. Like build lineups that make sense. Don't choose individual players. Individual players do not matter because predicting the future is fucking hard. All right. This is, so I'll talk about leverage in the Discord because I think I talk about that pretty frequently, but I want to talk about how to study past slates, and we're coming up on kind of the end of the stream. So we're going to go over that really quick. So here I have results database, and something that you all should be doing when you are studying past slates, and like basically Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, or like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you should be studying past slates. You should be looking at your process against other people's process. So what you do is you can go to, well, if you have, actually, I don't know if you need to have a subscription to RotoGrinders to use the results database. I do, but like, I don't know if you need to. But you can go to the results database and you can put in, like, once you go to this, you can put in a specific date that you want to look at, right? And you can just kind of delete this back. And then it's going to bring you to the results database for the classic for NFL on this most recent slate. And then you're going to go into contests. And then you can kind of look at any contest that you want to. Like you can look at in the $3, right? Because that's what I think that a lot of people play. And then you will go, usually what I'll do is I'll go straight over into ownership because I don't care about the winning lineup necessarily. I mean, I do, but I want to see what the people who scored the best ended up doing the most. So this dude who had 20 entries, right? Click on here and then you can see who he had the most exposure to. He ended up having 70% of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 65% of Ezekiel Elliott, and 65% of the Steelers defense. These obviously are all well over the field. Was there anybody that he ended up like, you can sort top down for the field. So where were his biggest fades? His biggest fade was Mike Davis, who he only had 10% of, and then the field had 31% of. He only also had 5% of Robbie Anderson. it kind of looks like he ended up fading the Panthers in $3. Um, he ended up having significantly less of CD Lamb. He had 0% CD Lamb, where the field had 19%. The ones that he had the most of were these guys, where these were all over, but then he was about even with Darius Slayton. He ate the chalk on that. He had quite a bit of Olamide. He had quite a bit of DeAndre Hopkins. He had a good amount of Michael Gallup over the field at 8%. He was about even here. So you could look through here, and this dude did pretty well. It looks like what he did was he just kind of like went with this combination of running backs. You can go in and see what running backs he actually had exposure to here. He had 20% Robinson. He had 20% Kenny Drake. But mostly what he wanted to do was get these two running backs and then spread out the exposures there. For wide receivers, he had a very, very spread out exposure to wide receivers. He probably locked at 35% and then just kind of let it run. For tight end, he ended up locking at 20%, probably just let it run. For quarterbacks, ended up locking at 20%, probably just let it run. Because like with this, it's not likely that he ended up saying, oh yeah, I certainly know that I want 5% of these guys. But maybe he did. You go through and you look at these players. So he did well. He had 20 lineups. He had these exposures. You can go down here and you can look at JJ11 Hickman. You can see who he had the most exposure to, where it was Ravens defense was his highest exposure, 50%. And then James Conner, Robbie Anderson, James Robinson, Todd Gurley. You know, you can look through all these things. If you want to go back to the contests and look into the Millie Maker. This is another thing you should be doing. Oh, I didn't do that right. Go to the Millie Maker, look at ownership. One thing that I'll usually do is sort this by 150 entries. And then I will find players that I respect, right? So I respect Maki Supa, and I want to see what his ownerships were. So you can see that he had 98% Sean Watson and 95% Will Fuller. He basically locked Deshaun Watson and Will Fuller as a stack in the Millie Maker and then tried to run things through. Look at running backs. He had 77% Hunt, 74% Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 70% Mike Davis. We know that we were on all three of those players. Like, there's nothing surprising here. For quarterbacks, he locked Deshaun Watson for all intents and purposes. Like, he had a little bit of Prescott, he had a little bit of Mahomes, but he fucking locked Deshaun Watson. We were on Houston last week. We were on Houston in terms of Houston, Will Fuller, and bringing back with DJ Chark. He had a whole bunch of Will Fuller, whole bunch of DJ Chark. So this kind of fits what we were thinking. He was going with, like, he locked in Houston. He ended up bringing it back with different combinations of Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault. Like, those were his ownerships. That's what he was banking on. His highest score was only 186, but this is a very good player that ended up doing this. You can go back and look at Brontosaurus as well. He maxed ownership at 50%. His highest ownership was Mike Davis. We were on Mike Davis. He ended up having a lot of Robbie Anderson, Olamide. It looks like that was probably something that he brought back against each other. He had DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley. It kind of looks like he ended up with a lot of Panthers and Falcons stacks. So if you go to wide receivers, indeed, his top 4 ownerships were from that game. Then he ended up having Russell Gage as well, but Tyreek Hill and Sammy Watkins, so he had some Kansas City as well. Patrick Mahomes, one of his higher ones. Matt Ryan, Teddy Bridgewater. So he was all in on the Panthers and Falcons stack. And then he ended up with Patrick Mahomes as well as his third ownership. So this is how you go back and you look through. You find people that you respect and you see what their ownerships were. You can ask yourself, was I also on these things? If you were not on Teddy Bridgewater and Matt Ryan and Patrick Mahomes, if you weren't on those 3 quarterbacks, then, you know, should you have been? Should you have thought about who he was putting together with those lineups? If you were looking at Maki Supa, were you on Deshaun Watson? Like, were you on the Houston stack? If you end up going through and you can look at more players, right? Like, look at Brandon Adams. Like, Brandon Adams is a really, really sharp dude. He ended up spreading out his exposure quite a bit. He ended up with quite a bit of Matt Ryan, Prescott, Daniel Jones, Teddy Bridgewater. Like, he ended up eating quite a bit of the chalk. These were all pretty popular players, but he ended up eating that and spreading out the exposure, mostly having Matt Ryan. He ended up taking stands on running backs with Ezekiel Elliott, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Josh Jacobs, Kareem Hunt, and Mike Davis, Myles Gaskin. Like, I think that we were all on these players. Were you? That's something that you need to ask yourself. For wide receivers, he obviously ended up with a lot of exposure to that Panthers and Atlanta game. Then he also had other pieces of his main stacks at quarterbacks. For tight end, he had a whole bunch of Darren Waller, which makes a lot of sense considering he had a lot of exposure to that Chiefs game. So this is what you should be doing. You should be going through and looking at players that you respect, looking at players who did well in the last week, ending up with an understanding of the things that you might have missed, an understanding of the things that you probably shouldn't have been on. This is how you go back and you look through things. So if you don't already use Results Database, like you should be using Results Database, it's a really, really good tool. But anyway, if you put uniques and randomness, do I still need to set exposure or set rules and stuff? Oh, dude, yeah, fucking absolutely. No, you absolutely need to be putting in rules. And we can talk about that a little bit later on, but like an optimizer doesn't do anything for you unless you tell it what to do. Like an optimizer, the way that you have to use an optimizer is saying, like the best way to use an optimizer is to hand build first a couple lineups and then try to get a whole bunch of different variations of those lineups. Like hand build Chiefs, hand build Panthers, hand build Falcons, and then go into the optimizer and like say that you want those 3 stacks. And then after you run, look through them. You have to look through every single lineup and say, oh, well, I have too much of this guy. I don't really want this much of this guy. Drop down his exposures. I'm getting a lot of Watkins, Hill, and Kelsey. And then you put in a group that says only 2 of Watkins, Hill, and Kelsey. And then you're getting a lot of Robbie Anderson with Mike Davis. Okay, well, make a rule that says if you have Mike Davis, then you don't want Robbie Anderson. Stuff like that. Rules and parameters are literally the only thing that makes an optimizer good. Like otherwise, you're just throwing like the most mathematically correct lineups out there, but medians don't win you GPPs. It's the groups and the parameters that win you GPPs. So we can talk about that a little bit later. There's a lot of MME guys in the Discord. Skeletor is really, really good about stuff like that. So we'll talk about that later, but this has been a Q&A for me for NFL. I hope that I answered as much questions as I could. I'll talk more in the Discord, obviously, but I'm going to jump off of here, get back to kind of lazy Friday, and then I will talk to you guys later. But thank you so much for tuning in. If you're not already a subscriber to paydirt.ghost.io, come subscribe. It's only $25 a month, and we're really heating up in the NFL season. So thank you so much. I'll talk to you guys later.